Xirtus.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians.
Join us on another exciting adventure of Xirtus.
Recent Tartarians.
Here at the theater we have lots of old equipment, really like all the most fancy stuff. But so the guy, Chris, who owns this place originally, he made a bunch of material originally, like in the 80s and 90s, and there's all of these cassette tapes by Rabbit Ear Productions, which is just, it's crazy because the Velveteen Rabbit and Brer Rabbit, Paul Bunyan. Anyway, we have access to all of this stuff. So, tapes. These are not a VHS. See, this is a VHS drive. You ain't gonna fit. You know? Look at that. So, everything you need. I like to leave the lights down low in this place because it's moodier, you know? Where's that go?
You know,
Oh my god.
There's like a plastic.
Can I see your light for a second?
Aren't that many cowboys these days? Not real ones like Pecos Bill. Whew, boy, Bill was a piece of work, boy. Ooh, he was the doggonedest gall-diggingest, dad-blamedest son of the prairie sod who ever rode across these great United States of America. Any cow-puncher worth a lick will tell you that if it weren't for Bill, there wouldn't have been a Wild West. It just would have been plain old mundane. And who wants to hear stories about the great mundane West? Ow, who'd to do? It took a man like Pecos Bill to conquer the West. Before he came on the scene, cowboys didn't know a thing about cows. They read some books about sheep, but what's that gonna do? And let me tell you, a cowboy who doesn't know about cows is pretty lame. It's a wild thing, but we're putting our socks on over our boots here, aren't we? We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, sliding down the hill without really knowing where the cactus are. Because to understand what Bill was about, you got to know that he was half coyote. Bill started out his life just like you and me, only slightly different. He was the youngest of 14 brothers and sisters, and his folks lived right smack in the middle of Texas. They were your regular family of prairie settlers, except Bill's father had a powerful fear of getting hemmed in by neighbors. When Bill was only a couple of weeks old, his father decided the family was gonna move. Some other family had moved in right next door, which was only 200 miles away. "If it's one thing I can't stand," said Bill's father, "it's being cramped by squatters." So Bill's family piled into their Conestoga wagon and headed west. They traveled in that wagon for 2 weeks when, quite by accident, little Bill squirted out the back. Since pioneers were too busy pioneering all the time, Bill's parents didn't realize he was gone until they took a head count 3 weeks later. By that time, they decided to chalk up the loss of their youngest son to experience and didn't bother backtracking to find the little devil. So there was poor Bill, a mere babe all alone on the ridge. His parents and his brothers and his sisters were gone forever. Pecos Bill's prospects looked mighty slim. He was lording a snake's belly in a wagon rut. Luckily, the first critter to happen upon Bill was a coyote. Like all coyotes, this one had a soft spot for youngins. So she took him back. Let me fix my teeth here. Here they are. These are them store-bought ones, and they don't hang in that well. So she took him back over to the den. There, Bill grew up just like a coyote. A darn good coyote, too. Bill learned to run across the plains, kicking up clouds of dust faster than a jackrabbit. He was so fast he could outrun the deer when the two of them played tag. Well, that deer would look up, go, ah, and he was gone. Mostly he played fair with the other coyotes, although from time to time he did take advantage of them. He was especially good at the sing-alongs at night when all the coyotes would go up on the ridge and howl at the moon. One day, Bill was scouting down by the Pecos River looking for his coyote buddies when he came across the strangest creature. Mind you, Bill had never seen a cowboy before because he was a coyote, and coyotes have no time for humans for fear that might end up on the collar of some coat on a woman named Selma in New York. So Bill sidled up to the cowboy, coyote style, you know, that little tap dance move they do when they make a move and then freeze, so you think that they're a large four-legged bush, and he investigated the situation. Bill had never seen anything like this sorry dude before. The cowboy couldn't believe his eyes either, because as you can imagine, Bill was quite a sight for the stranger to behold. He looked down at Bill from his horse and said, "Well, you're as naked as a jaybird, partner. Why in tarnation you running around without clothes? Did you lose 'em in a poker game, or you just glad to see me?" "What do you mean, naked?" Bill howled. "I'm a coyote, and coyotes don't wear no clothes." "That'll be the day," said the cowboy. "You're no coyote, shucks, you don't even have a tail. You're a human being." Bill turned his head to look down along his backside, and by Jiminy, hoo-de-doo, he didn't have a tail. But Bill was not completely convinced. After all, he was happy to be a coyote. "But I've got fleas, and I howl at the moon at night," Bill replied. "Well, gwan. Everybody knows that all Texicans got fleas and howl at the moon." Bill didn't want to believe he was no longer a coyote, but this stranger had made several valid points. The cowboy was a neighborly sort, so he gave Bill the extra set of duds he kept in his saddlebag. And as soon as Bill put on these clothes, it was like he was a natural-born cowboy. It took Bill an hour to learn how to talk. Back in those days, coyote lingo and Texican were almost the same language, you know, basically a lot of howls and vowels. He had only 50 words to learn. Bill had woke up thinking he was a coyote, and by sundown he was a walking, talking cowboy. Naturally, he still had more than a few coyote notions left in him. It ended up being a pretty full day for Pecos Bill. Bill didn't waste any time and set right out across the range to find out what it was like being a cowboy. Before he got too far, he was surprised by a 42-foot rattlesnake sunning himself on a rock. That rattler saw Bill and figured, it's lunchtime, ding-ding-ding-ding. But old Bill, he had another idea. I needed a rope, and now I got one, and it's got a rattle attached to it, too. Hey, dig it! Oh, wow! Once he found his rope, Bill decided he needed a critter to ride. Up in the hills, he bumped into a cougar that was 2 tons bigger than any horse, and he knew this was his steed. Bill jumped on that cat's back, heeled him in the ribs, and gave him a loud, "Get up." That cougar didn't take too kindly to his coyote cowboy passenger, all the time yelling out, "What you doing? What are you doing on my back? Pardon me? Excuse me? What are you doing on my... Excuse me, I'm a cougar. I'm not a pony. Pardon me, you large chump. Get off my back." Bill just smiled and grinned and said, "Woo, coming out of chute number 9. Look at me going wild now." Bill was having a good old time. Day and night, Bill rode his snarling cougar and twirled his rattlesnake rope and generally whipped it up. On the 12th day, he came across a cowboy camp. Now, Bill had worked up quite an appetite on his little ride, so he made a beeline for the campfire. He swallowed a whole kettle of pork belly and beans, then he washed it down with a pot of boiling hot coffee, and when he was done with chow, he wiped his mouth with a hunk of cactus and picked his teeth with a wagon wheel. Woo! Coyotes, unlike cowboys, are always tidy when they dine. Never one for fancy introductions, Bill stood there looking at the cowboys and inquired, "Who's the boss here?" These cowboys, as tough and hard as they were, had never seen a buckaroo like Bill. They knew right off that they were in the company of someone slightly different. The ugliest and meanest of these cowpokes was named Sourdough. He was so nasty that all the other cowboys let him be the boss because they didn't want to look him in the eye and tell him otherwise. Now Sourdough ambled up to Pecos, and the two of them stood there face to face, eye to eye, nose to nose. "I wasn't a boss till you showed up," said Sourdough, sweet as honey. "Partner, that was the ding-dangingest display I've ever seen. I reckon you're the boss now." "Well, what do you fellers do anyway?" Bill asked. "Not much," said Sourdough. "We eat beans, we ride around a bit, and other than that, it's pretty slow around these parts." "Well, what do you do with all these cows?" said Bill. "We got so many of them, we don't know what to do with them all," Sourdough replied. "Well, if you boys aren't dumb as dirt," said Bill, who was always thinking, even though he was no Rhodes Scholar, "let's take these cows up to Kansas. Folks up there could use them as pets. Leastways, it'll give us something to do." And just like that, easy as pie, Bill had invented the cattle drive. Bill and his men commenced to marching those cows right up to Kansas or bust. Riding his cougar mount on the cattle drive just wasn't working out for Bill. After a while, the longhorns, not to mention the other cowpokes, were getting mighty spooked and acting like regular nervous nails around that cat. Bill needed a new mount, and as soon as Bill spotted this one wild Mustang, he knew he had found his perfect riding companion. That Mustang had a history of being the most ornery critter in the West. The cowboys called him Widowmaker, since riding him was the last thing a feller did. "That's just the kind of sweet little hossy I want," Bill said as he rubbed his hands together. Off Bill ran after that Mustang like a coyote chasing the wind. Polecats gonna ride my back. fast as Widowmaker galloped, Bill still managed to overtake him. You can imagine how this surprised the unsociable Mustang. Why don't we just team up and get it over with so we can whoop it up together? Bill said to Widowmaker, as sweet as he could be. Widowmaker gave Bill a sniff and figured that if anyone smelled this bad and still walked upright, he couldn't be that bad. After that, the two of them were quick partners. You couldn't separate them with a crowbar. Widowmaker had dynamite in his hooves and nitroglycerin in his veins. Only one man could ride him, let alone understand him, and that was Pecos Bill. In those days, cowboys weren't too good at rounding up cattle. So it was up to Pecos Bill to show his cowboys how a real buckaroo worked a cattle drive. One day, Sourdough followed a stray steer to the top of a mountain and got himself stranded. Down in the flatlands, Bill got all the rope he could muster and lassoed his partner and the steer from the top of that mountain. The other cowpunchers on the cattle drive took to the new device, and it became an important cowboy tool, especially for roping a steer by the horns. And that's how cowboys started using lariats. The cattle sometimes got a mite perturbed with Pecos now that the one shoe was on the other hoof. One day, the biggest, most cantankerous steer decided to fix him for good. This steer, Old Blue was his name, lowered his horns, got Bill in his sights, and charged at him like he was going to send him to heaven or get a new pair of shoes. When Bill got a load of what was happening, he froze Old Blue right in mid-stride with his eyes, gave him the old Houdini one-shot. Bingo! Snapped that cow's pretty soon. The next thing, he's counting backwards and thinks he's a chicken, clucking around, and if that cow didn't lay an egg, I'm not who you think I am. After Bill unfroze him, Old Blue was the best steer they had on the cattle drive. Day after day, he always led the way for the rest of the cattle, pushing forward on the trail to Kansas. When the cattle drive got to the Rio Grande, Bill's life changed forever. Down the river came this independent little gal, stand up riding on the back of a 53-foot catfish. Even for Texas, that was a pretty fair-sized catfish. That was the first time Bill laid eyes on Slewfoot Sue. Hooray! That's the prettiest girl in the world. Yet Bill, who was reduced to a lovesick pup as soon as he saw Slewfoot Sue. I love you with all my heart. I want to make you my wife. Slewfoot Sue was flattered by the proposal. The idea of spending the rest of her days with a prospect like Pecos Bill was mighty appealing. I'd be honored to be your lawful wife, Sue told Bill. Why don't you finish this here cattle drive, and I'll meet you in Kansas when you're done. And when we get married, we'll live happily ever after, said Bill. The two lovebirds parted ways. Sue riding her catfish down the Rio Grande, and Bill headed north with the cattle drive. Bill pushed on with a vengeance. The trail was dusty, the sun was scorching, the days were long, the cattle smelled bad, and that was the good part. Every night when the sun went down behind the mountains, all the cowboys would gather around the campfire to whittle and play a game of cards. Canasta wasn't very big, and 21 hadn't gotten that far since most of them could only count to 10. Bill would tuck the cattle into bed. Then he'd go on the high ridge and howl at the moon. You know, that... Maybe Bill went off to howl because he was longing for Sue. Maybe he needed to be by himself for a spell. Or maybe he just missed his coyote family. But there was one thing for certain. Howling at the moon was something Bill just had to do. For 5 months, the cattle drive pushed on until finally Bill and his cowboys were less than a day's ride from the Kansas border. It was time to celebrate. The end of the drive was near. Yeah, doggy! Bill gave the fellers the rest of the day off, and they held a hoot, and it was singing and dancing. You know, turn your partner round and round. They're having a foot-stomping good time when right in the middle of the do-si-do, the biggest cyclone ever seen in the west darkened the horizon. The twister swirling around at 500 miles an hour and sucking up everything in its path. It was headed right toward the cattle. Bill knew in his bones he had to do something. He threw his lariat and lassoed the cyclone by the neck. Widowmaker and Bill tried with all their might to pull it down, but this was no ordinary tornado. No, sirree. The cyclone snapped its head forward and Bill shot off Widowmaker. He hung on to the rope and dug his heels in, and he dug him right into the ground there, trying to keep that twister under control, but there was nothing doing. No check, sir, waiter. The cyclone stopped short and backlash yanked Bill smack into its back. All right, you big bag of wind, hollered Bill. Show me what you can do. Yeah! Ha ha! Bill had the ride of his life on that twister. The two of them bucked and rolled and clawed so hard they dug out the Grand Canyon. Bill tried to knock out the cyclone by riding into a mountain, but that twister just ripped off the mountaintop and rolled on through. The cyclone spun faster and faster and faster to try and get Bill to loosen his grip. Oh, fat chance, amigo. All the cyclone ended up doing was fanning the lakes dry. Now that made Bill mad. Bill pulled so tight that he made that cyclone cry. Yeah! That twister bawled so hard its tears welled up and made the Great Salt Lake. And there were a group of Mormons just going, "Thank you, Lord, it's a miracle." They didn't know it was Bill. Nope. Out into the Gulf of Mexico that twister went, tail dancing across the water like a king salmon, spitting prawns all over Louisiana. Bill gave a crank and the twister rolled on its back, crazier than a bronc on loco weed. Moving on, scraping the land flat. Folks call that spot Death Valley from then on because nothing lived there after Bill and that twister were done with it. But Bill hung on, and they went back and forth like that for 10 full days until Bill finally managed to steer that twister up toward heaven. Up they went riding through the clouds, up and up, till all of a sudden it's shooting number one coming on the heavenly host. Yes, sirree, it was the Last Supper and everybody was there. They're all hanging around till God went, "Whoa, boy, you're home!" And that was the last anybody ever heard of Bill. Now, you may think I made all this up, and you may think I'm stretching a tail a touch, yanking you a little bit, pulling your leg. But hey, well, the cowboys got the cattle drives to Kansas. From then on, cowboys always made cattle drives just the way Bill told them. Now, don't you go feeling sorry for Bill. He would have laughed at you for being so sentimental. Now, come on. After all, Bill isn't really gone. If you go to West Texas, you can still see Bill. If you try hard enough, yes, you can. Listen to the wind. And when it starts to howl like a coyote, you know that. You look high up in the sky. I guarantee that Pecos Bill and Slewfoot Sue will be there, riding Widowmaker across the heavens, using the moon as a tambourine, jumping from cloud to cloud. Yes, sirree, Bobcat tail. Yes, sirree.
Where is this airing right now? Or is
This program is coming to you by a Relay 2 satellite, a spacecraft orbiting the Earth at a speed of over 17,000 miles per hour.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians.
Xirtus.